Some people do not reveal themselves when life is calm. They reveal themselves when desire enters the room. When there is something to gain, something to protect, something to lose. The mask begins to loosen. Not all at once. Not in a dramatic way, but in small movements. A certain look, a delayed answer. A kindness that disappears the moment it is no longer useful. Think about it. The fake person does not always come to you wearing a false smile. Sometimes they come with warmth, with attention, with the right words at the right time. And that is why so many people misjudge them. They confuse performance with sincerity. They confuse charm with character. They confuse being noticed with being valued. Stay with me until the end, because the deeper signs are not the obvious ones. The most dangerous kind of falsehood is not loud. It is polished. It knows how to behave. It knows how to wait until your guard is down. And if these reflections help you see people more clearly, consider subscribing. Not for noise, not for empty motivation, but for a calmer way of understanding power, timing, relationships, and human nature. Welcome back to Guiguzi Strategic Wisdom. I'm David Welbeck, the writer behind this video. And today, I want to talk about the traits fake people always reveal. Not the shallow version of this topic. Not the simple idea that fake people gossip, lie, or smile too much. Life is more complicated than that. Human beings are layered. People are not always what they appear to be. And sometimes even the person deceiving you has already deceived themselves. The real question is not, how do I spot someone fake? The real question is, what pressure makes a person's true nature appear? Because in ordinary moments, almost anyone can seem decent. When there is no cost, kindness is easy. When there is no temptation, loyalty is easy. When there is no rivalry, humility is easy. But place a person near opportunity, attention, money, status, or emotional power, and you begin to see the pattern beneath the behavior. This is where most people get it wrong. They judge people by how they act when everything is convenient. Wise people watch how someone behaves when the situation starts demanding something from them. There is an old strategic truth that says the heart does not open because you ask it to. It opens when circumstance presses against it. That is the first hidden law. Fake people reveal themselves through conditional warmth. At first, they may seem generous. They may praise you. They may make you feel seen. They may speak as if they understand your pain, your ambition, your loneliness, your need to be believed in. And because all of us carry some quiet hunger for recognition, we can easily mistake their attention for care. But attention is not care. That is not love. That is not loyalty. That is not character. That is often just instinct looking for advantage. A fake person's warmth changes according to what they believe you can provide. When you are useful, they are present. When you are admired, they stay close. When your name opens doors, they remember you. When your energy feeds them, they call it friendship. But when your value becomes less obvious, when you are tired, uncertain, unpopular, broke, grieving, or no longer able to offer them access to something they want, you begin to see the truth. The room gets colder. Not because you did something wrong. It is because their affection was never rooted in who you are. It was attached to what they could get from being near you. Look at reality for what it is. In friendship, this can look like someone who celebrates you only when your success reflects well on them. At work, it can look like a colleague who supports you in public, but quietly distances themselves when leadership questions your direction. In family, it can look like someone who remembers blood only when they need help, but forgets it when you need understanding. In marriage or romance, it can look like tenderness that depends entirely on control, convenience, or emotional comfort. Do you see the turning point here? The issue is not that people have needs. Everyone has needs. Everyone forms relationships partly through shared benefit. That is human nature. The problem is when benefit becomes the whole foundation, and the language of love is used to disguise transaction. Fake people do not always betray you with a knife. Sometimes they betray you with absence. They vanish when their presence would cost them something. And this is painful, because sincere people often project their own inner life onto others. If you are loyal, you assume loyalty. If you are grateful, you assume gratitude. If you remember what someone did for you, you assume they remember what you did for them. But not everyone carries memory the same way. Some people remember favors only as long as they still need the source of the favor. This is not bitterness. This is clarity. I remember someone I once knew through a business circle in Chicago. I will call this person Marcus. We were not deeply close, but we spoke often. Coffee meetings, late calls, ideas about projects. There was always a sense that something bigger was coming. Marcus had a gift for making people feel chosen. When he needed introductions, he was warm. When he needed advice, he was humble. When he needed someone to stand beside him in a difficult conversation, he sounded almost brotherly. Then one season, I went through a quiet professional setback. Nothing dramatic, no public failure. Just one of those moments where momentum slows, confidence thins out, and you begin to learn who was drawn to you and who was drawn to the light around you. Marcus did not attack me. He did not insult me. He simply became hard to reach. The replies became shorter. The warmth disappeared. When we crossed paths at an event, his eyes moved past me toward the people who looked more useful in that room. And I remember standing there, not angry, just awake. That moment taught me something I never forgot. A fake person does not always leave when they hate you. Sometimes they leave when your usefulness expires, and the consequence of missing this sign is costly. You may keep investing your loyalty into someone who is only studying your value. You may excuse their distance, blame yourself, chase their approval, and call it misunderstanding. But the longer you ignore conditional warmth, the more you lose your dignity trying to revive a connection that was never built to survive hardship. Wise people do not demand perfect loyalty from everyone. They simply learn to separate friendliness from commitment. They know that a person who is only kind when the wind is favorable is not necessarily evil, but they are not safe either. The closing insight is this: real character has a memory. It remembers people when they are no longer shining. It does not need an audience to remain decent. It does not treat someone's low season as permission to disappear. The second trait fake people reveal is borrowed conviction. They do not stand on values. They wear them. And this is much harder to detect, because borrowed conviction often sounds impressive. These people know the right language. They know what to condemn. They know what to praise. They know how to sound loyal, spiritual, disciplined, brave, compassionate, principled, or wise, depending on the room they are standing in. But their beliefs do not come from the center of their character. They come from the pressure of the crowd. That is not conviction. That is adaptation. And adaptation is not always bad. Mature people know how to adjust. Wise people know that every room has its own rhythm, and there is no virtue in being reckless with speech. But there is a difference between restraint and emptiness. There is a difference between diplomacy and having no inner spine. The fake person listens first, not to understand truth, but to discover what identity will be rewarded. And once they know what the room admires, they become it. At work, they may speak about integrity when leadership is listening, then quietly cut corners when responsibility becomes inconvenient. In social circles, they may defend kindness while privately feeding resentment. In public, they may speak about loyalty, but in private, they trade confidential stories for attention. In family, they may perform concern in front of others, then avoid the actual labor of care when no one is watching. Think about it. The real question is not, what does this person say they believe? The real question is, what do they protect when there is no reward for protecting it? Because values are not proven by language. Values are proven by cost. A person can say they believe in honesty, but what happens when honesty makes them look bad? A person can say they believe in loyalty, but what happens when loyalty makes them less popular? A person can say they believe in love, but what happens when love requires patience, sacrifice, listening, or self-control? That is where the mask begins to crack. There is a line of strategic wisdom I often return to. The mouth declares the flag, but pressure reveals the kingdom. In modern life, this means a person's words can announce one thing while their instincts serve another. And instinct is more honest than performance. Desire is more honest than branding. Reaction is more honest than image. Fake people often borrow convictions because they are not centered enough to live from their own inner law. They fear exclusion. They fear losing status. They fear being judged. So they shapeshift. They mirror the powerful. They flatter the popular. They agree with the loudest voice, not because they have studied the matter deeply, but because disagreement would cost them comfort. This is where most people get it wrong. They think fake people are always obvious cowards. But many are socially skillful. Many are intelligent. Many are pleasant. They understand the emotional weather of a room. They know when to nod, when to look serious, when to act offended, when to act humble, when to say, "I'm just being honest," and when to say, "I care about everyone here." But watch the pattern over time. Do their values remain steady across different rooms? Do they speak of someone with respect in one setting and contempt in another? Do they change their moral position when the powerful person changes theirs? Do they defend principles only when those principles make them look good? Look at reality for what it is. A fake person with borrowed conviction is dangerous because they make you believe there is ground beneath your feet when there is only fog. You may trust their agreement. You may build plans with them. You may confide in them because they sounded aligned with you. But when pressure arrives, they will not stand where they stood yesterday. They will stand where survival tells them to stand today. And if you are not careful, you will be shocked by this. You will say, "But they said they believed in this." You will say, "But they told me they were on my side." You will say, "But I thought we saw life the same way." No. You saw language. You did not yet see character. The consequence of trusting borrowed conviction is that you may expose your heart, your plans, your weaknesses, or your future to someone who has not earned that access. You may believe you are walking with a person of depth, only to discover they were walking with whatever kept them safe. The closing insight is simple, but it takes time to accept. Wise people do not measure sincerity by emotional speeches. They measure it by consistency under pressure. Because someone who has no inner root will always bend toward advantage. The third trait fake people reveal is selective truth. They do not always lie directly. Sometimes they tell just enough truth to control the picture. And this is one of the most subtle forms of falsehood, because a half-truth can feel cleaner than a lie. It gives the speaker a sense of innocence. It lets them say, "I never lied." It lets them hide behind technical accuracy while shaping your perception in a dishonest direction. That is not honesty. That is strategy without conscience. A person who uses selective truth understands that most people do not investigate deeply. Most people respond to tone, confidence, timing, and emotional framing. So fake people do not need to invent everything. They only need to leave out the part that would change the meaning. This happens everywhere. In friendship, someone tells you what another person said, but not what they said first to provoke it. At work, someone describes a conflict in a way that makes them seem calm and reasonable, while removing every detail that shows their ambition, insecurity, or manipulation. In family, someone retells an old argument in a way that preserves their innocence and turns everyone else into a problem. In marriage, someone says, "I was only talking to them," while leaving out the emotional intimacy, the secrecy, the intention, the hunger for attention. The words may be accurate. The picture is false. Do you see the turning point here? The real danger is not always the person who openly lies. Open lies can be confronted. They can be exposed. But selective truth moves like smoke. It surrounds the facts without letting you breathe clearly. It makes you doubt your instincts, because every piece sounds plausible on its own. And this is why self-control matters. When you are emotionally hungry, you may accept the version of truth that hurts less. When you are afraid to lose someone, you may believe their explanation too quickly. When you want peace, you may ignore the missing pieces. When you want to be seen as fair, you may give endless benefit of the doubt to someone who is using your fairness as cover. This is where most people get it wrong. They think kindness means refusing to question anyone's story. But maturity is not suspicion toward everyone. Maturity is the patience to observe before surrendering your judgment. There is an old strategic principle beneath this. When the map is incomplete, do not rush your army forward. In modern life, that means when someone gives you a story that feels too polished, too convenient, too perfectly arranged around their innocence, slow down. Do not accuse too quickly. Do not react too quickly. But do not hand over your clarity either. Ask yourself, what is missing? Who benefits from this version? What would I believe if I heard the other side? Why does this explanation require me to ignore a pattern I have already seen? Fake people often rely on your emotional speed. They want you to react before you reflect. They want you angry at the person they are framing. They want you grateful for the explanation they are offering. They want you confused enough to depend on them for interpretation. That is not because they are always brilliant. It is because they understand instinct. They understand that people are easier to lead when they are hurt, flattered, afraid, or rushed. The consequence of accepting selective truth is that you may become a tool in someone else's hidden conflict. You may cut off the wrong person. You may defend the wrong person. You may carry resentment that was planted in you by someone who only told you the part of the story that served them. And later, when the full picture appears, you may feel foolish, not because you were weak, but because you were unguarded at the wrong moment. The closing insight is this: truth is not only what is said. Truth is also what the speaker hopes you will never ask. And wise people learn to listen not only to words, but to omissions. The fourth trait fake people reveal is emotional debt. They give, but every gift has a hook. At first, it may look like generosity. They help you. They support you. They open a door, offer a favor, send a message, show up when you are struggling. And sometimes, yes, the help is real. The action itself may be useful. But over time, you begin to feel something tightening around it. A debt, an expectation, a quiet claim over your choices. That is not generosity. That is control wearing the clothing of kindness. Real generosity leaves you freer. False generosity makes you smaller. There is a kind of person who does not give because the moment calls for goodness. They give because giving creates leverage. They remember every favor not with gratitude, but with accounting. They may not say it immediately. They may even act offended if you notice it. But later, when you make a decision they dislike, when you set a boundary, when you disagree, when you stop being useful, the old favor returns like a weapon. After everything I did for you. Those words reveal more than people realize. They reveal that the gift was never fully a gift. In family, this can become a lifelong chain. Someone helps you once, then uses that help to demand obedience for years. In friendship, someone supports you during a low season, then expects unlimited access to your time, your secrets, your loyalty, your emotional labor. At work, someone mentors you, then quietly expects you to serve their ambition instead of developing your own. In love, someone gives affection and later uses it to make you feel guilty for wanting respect. Think about it. The real question is not, did this person help me? The real question is, did their help preserve my dignity, or did it purchase my silence? This is not because receiving help is wrong. We all need help. No person becomes strong alone. Life is built through mutual support, hidden sacrifices, small mercies, and moments where someone reaches out before we collapse. But mature people know the difference between gratitude and bondage. You can be grateful without becoming owned. You can remember someone's kindness without surrendering your judgment. You can honor what they did without allowing them to use it to erase what they are doing now. That is the discipline most people learn too late. Fake people often use emotional debt because they are afraid of equal relationships. Equality requires trust. It requires restraint. It requires knowing that someone can love you and still say no. Someone can appreciate you and still choose differently. Someone can respect the past and still protect their future. But the controlling person cannot tolerate that. They turn kindness into a contract you never signed. They turn your gratitude into a leash. And if you lack clarity, guilt will make you easy to move. This is where most people get it wrong. They think guilt is always proof of wrongdoing. But sometimes guilt is only proof that someone has found the softest part of your conscience and learned how to press it. Look at reality for what it is. If you are a decent person, you will naturally remember who stood beside you. You will not want to seem ungrateful. You will not want to hurt someone who once helped you. And that instinct can be honorable. But when someone repeatedly uses past kindness to excuse present disrespect, the relationship has already changed shape. It is no longer love. It is no longer friendship. It is no longer guidance. It is pressure. And pressure reveals the hidden design. A wise person does not reject help out of pride. That would be another kind of weakness. But a wise person watches what happens after the help is given. Does the person allow you to grow? Do they respect your freedom? Do they celebrate your strength when you no longer need them in the same way? Or do they become resentful when their influence begins to fade? Do you see the turning point here? Some people do not want to help you rise. They want to be remembered as the reason you rose, so they can stand at the gate of your future and collect payment. The consequence of ignoring emotional debt is that you may lose years trying to repay what was never meant to be repaid in a healthy way. You may stay in the wrong circle, the wrong job, the wrong relationship, the wrong family pattern, because someone keeps reminding you of what they once did when you were vulnerable. And slowly, you begin to confuse loyalty with captivity. You begin to lose yourself while trying to prove you are not selfish. But maturity requires a harder kind of honesty. It requires you to say, even if only in your own heart, I can honor what was good without submitting to what is wrong. That is not betrayal. That is self-respect. The closing insight is this: genuine kindness does not keep a ledger in the shadows. It does not wait for your weakest moment to present the bill. It helps because the moment called for help, not because your future obedience was being quietly purchased. The fifth trait fake people reveal is impatience with your boundaries. This may be the clearest sign of all, because boundaries are where performance meets reality. A fake person can respect your smile. They can respect your talent. They can respect your usefulness. They can respect the version of you that says yes, that explains, that forgives quickly, that absorbs discomfort so the relationship can remain smooth. But watch what happens when you say no. Watch what happens when you delay access. Watch what happens when you stop explaining yourself to someone who feeds on your explanations. That is where the truth appears. There is an old strategic idea hidden in plain sight. The gate reveals the visitor. Anyone can praise the house from outside, but the one who becomes angry at the locked door did not come only to admire it. In modern life, your boundary is that gate. It shows you who came with respect and who came with appetite. Fake people are often patient when they are gaining access, but impatient when access is denied. They may call your boundary cold. They may call your silence disrespectful. They may call your independence pride. They may accuse you of changing, when the truth is that you have simply stopped being available for every demand. That is not because your boundary is cruel. It is because your boundary removes their advantage. Think about it. The real question is not, does this person like me when I am agreeable? The real question is, can this person still respect me when I protect myself? In friendship, this can look like someone who becomes offended when you stop answering every late-night call. At work, it can look like someone who praises your dedication until you refuse to carry their responsibilities. In family, it can look like someone who mistakes access for entitlement, then calls you unloving when you need peace. In marriage or romance, it can look like someone who says they want closeness, but punishes you whenever closeness does not mean control. This is where life becomes very practical, not philosophical, practical. Because time is limited, energy is limited, trust is limited. You cannot keep giving your inner life to people who only respect you when you are easy to use. You cannot keep losing sleep over people who treat your boundaries as an insult. You cannot build a peaceful life while constantly negotiating with someone else's appetite. And yet many people do. They stay because they fear loneliness. They stay because they remember the good moments. They stay because they hope the person will finally understand. They stay because family pressure tells them to keep the peace. They stay because work pressure tells them to be a team player. They stay because social pressure tells them not to seem difficult. They stay because they have already invested so much that leaving feels like admitting they misjudged someone. But look at reality for what it is. The cost of misjudging people is not only betrayal. Sometimes the cost is time. Sometimes it is confidence. Sometimes it is the quiet erosion of your own instincts. You begin to feel guilty for needing space. You begin to explain what should not need explanation. You begin to apologize for protecting what is sacred in you. And one day, you realize you have become a stranger to yourself just to remain acceptable to someone who was never satisfied. Do you see the turning point here? A boundary does not create the fake person's reaction. It reveals it. The impatient, the controlling, the emotionally hungry, the socially ambitious, the person who needs you as a mirror, a ladder, a shield, or a source of comfort. They may all look calm while the door is open. But close the door gently, even once, and watch what rises in them. Anger, mockery, punishment, withdrawal, a sudden accusation, a sudden story about how you are the problem. That reaction is information. Do not waste it. Wise people do not set boundaries to dominate others. They set boundaries to remain clear. They know that without restraint, relationships become confusion. Without self-control, kindness becomes exhaustion. Without timing, forgiveness becomes permission. Without judgment, love becomes a place where manipulation can hide. And this brings us back to the central question. What truly reveals a fake person? Not one mistake, not one bad day, not one awkward moment. A mature person understands that everyone has weakness, everyone has fear, everyone has seasons where they speak poorly, act defensively, or fail to live up to their better nature. What reveals a fake person is the pattern that appears under pressure. Watch how they behave when you are no longer useful. Watch how their values change when the room changes. Watch how much truth they leave out when they need to look innocent. Watch whether their kindness makes you freer or more indebted. Watch how they react when you say no. That is where the mask loosens. That is where appearance meets character. That is where performance either becomes sincerity or collapses into strategy. Why do so many people mistake performance for sincerity? Because performance often arrives first. It is louder. It is smoother. It knows how to imitate warmth. It knows how to speak the language of loyalty, care, humility, and concern. Sincerity is usually quieter. It does not rush to prove itself. It does not need to announce its own goodness every time it enters a room. And because many of us are tired, lonely, ambitious, wounded, or hungry to be understood, we accept the appearance before time has tested the substance. This is not something to be ashamed of. It is something to outgrow. A wise person is not a saint. A wise person is not perfect. A wise person does not walk through life untouched by desire, fear, hope, or disappointment. Wisdom is more human than that. A wise person knows what matters. They know what to protect. They know what to let go of. They know when to wait. They know when to act. They know that not every smile deserves access. Not every apology proves change. Not every favor is love. Not every agreement is loyalty. And not every person who walks beside you is walking in the same direction. The mature person does not become cold. They become clear. They still care, but they do not surrender their judgment to emotion. They still forgive, but they do not confuse forgiveness with blindness. They still help, but they do not let guilt make them a servant to someone else's hidden hunger. They still believe in people, but they let time, pressure, and patterns speak before they give away the keys to their inner life. That is the quiet rule. Do not judge people only by how they approach you. Judge them by what they become when they cannot control you. If this video met you at the right moment, I hope you carry it carefully. Share it with someone who may need to hear it, not as a warning to become suspicious of everyone, but as a reminder to stay awake. Leave a comment with your own thoughts or experience, because sometimes one person's story helps another person finally understand what they have been feeling for years. And if you have not subscribed yet, continue this journey with Guiguzi Strategic Wisdom. Here, we look beneath appearances, beneath noise, beneath the surface of human behavior, and we try to understand the quiet laws that shape a life. Thank you for staying until the end. I'm David Welbeck, the writer behind these videos. I'll see you in the next one.